Turning to the cousin, the other Roosevelt, you seem to think, as I was reading, you think very, very highly of FDR. Is he one of your favorites?
He is. And one of the reasons he's one of my favorites is because he recognizes the power of the office and he really tries to use it to help as many people as possible. I think that's really just what I have to say. He's not a philosopher. Roosevelt was not someone who thought about, what is the optimum way for me to think about this in terms of moral justice. But what he thought about was, I've got this big office that I've inherited. How can I use it and maybe even make it bigger to help people who need to be helped? And I respect that inclination.
In what way does this differ then from, say, Washington or Andrew Jackson? Because Andrew Jackson, like you mentioned, he increased the size of the electorate. His goal was to help the common man. And then Washington's was similar in the sense of uniting the people. So what did FDR do differently?
I think FDR wanted to help more different kinds of people. He's the first president really who tries to use the office. TR did this a little bit, but FDR is the first president who really tries to use the office to help vulnerable groups. And let's be clear, he's not doing it because he's a moral saint. He recognized that was the way to get more power also. He recognized these groups, if they were brought into the electorate, if their lives were made better, that they would become part of a long-term Democratic Party electorate. And that's true. He succeeded at that. So if that was one of his goals, to create the Democratic Party as the party that served more people, that served Jews, African Americans, Asian Americans, et cetera, right? If it was going to be the party that served those groups for the next 30 years, it would be. And it dominates American politics until the 60s and 70s. That's what he did.
Was he a member of the Democratic Party?
He was. His family was a longtime Democratic Party. The Theodore Roosevelt, the Oyster Bay Roosevelts, that part of New York were the Republicans. That's Theodore Roosevelt. The Hyde Park Roosevelts were the Democratic Roosevelts. They were Democrats because that was a part of the country the part of New York actually that had a lot of poverty. And these were groups that felt not represented by the Republican Party. It was also an area that used to have slavery. Franklin Roosevelt's family never had slaves, but it is a part of New York that actually goes back to the slaveholding period as well. And he also, has to be said, he has this transformation because of the polio that he contracts in the early 20s. He spends a lot of time, even though he's from a very wealthy family, with very poor people in Georgia, in Warm Springs, Georgia, where he was convalescing. And he comes to see their suffering, understand their suffering, as most people wouldn't who are not poor. But also he comes to see them as potential political supporters. And so he builds a movement, the New Deal, around them.
Yeah, I mean, and we certainly see this sort of mindset at work in the Democratic Party today.
Exactly. He is the creator of the modern Democratic Party. It goes back to Andrew Jackson, but it is the party of FDR. That's why Biden and Obama refer to FDR all the time.
And what were some of the policies he enacted or other moves he made to directly broaden and enfranchise the electorate, as you indicated he did?
One of the most important things he did was try to put people to work, because he knew that if they were out of jobs, and we know this, when people were out of work, they become despondent, they don't get involved, and if anything, they become extreme in their views, right? So he wanted people to be put to work. So one of the best policies he pursued, one of the most effective policies, I think, was the creation of the Civilian Conservation Corps. It's one of a number of organizations he creates. The CCC puts young people between, I think, 18 to 26, where the unemployment rate was like 50%, they were not getting jobs, puts them to work planting trees, building pathways in national parks. If you've gone to a national park, you've been on a CCC pathway. He's creating work for them. They're getting paid. They're working and living together. And the idea is they feel they were part of the electorate. They feel they were part of America. It's striking how many people who lived through that period and then lived through World War II remember their CCC experience as much as the war, because it changed their lives. Another example of this is the Works Progress Administration, which was created to put older people to work who had lost their jobs. Ronald Reagan's father, Jack Reagan, who lost his job in Dixon, Illinois, became a WPA person, worked for the WPA. And Ronald Reagan himself said it changed his family life because his father went from being despondent to feeling, wait, I have a chance, I have a possibility here. And his father became a Roosevelt voter. Reagan grew up as a Democrat, actually.
I just spoke the other day with the socialist economist Richard Wolff, and I know that he was a very big fan of the CCC and the WPA and these employment policies of FDR.
Yeah. And so FDR recognized that if you want people to be a part of the solution, you got to give them a job so they have a stake in what's going on in society. That was what he was doing. He was putting people to work.
And what beyond his social goals marked the priorities of his presidency? Or was that really the basic thing going on?
Well, no, he was a real believer, a deep believer in bringing modernization. He agreed with his cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, on this. One of the most important things Roosevelt does is he brings electricity to rural areas. Lyndon Johnson, who grew up just a few miles outside of Austin, where I live, Lyndon Johnson grew up, as most rural Americans did in the 1920s and 30s, with no electricity. I ask my students often, imagine living without electricity. Imagine living in Texas in the summer without air conditioning. How did they do it, right? We couldn't live. You and I, Robinson, couldn't live without electricity. Where would we plug in our phones, right? Most Americans outside of cities, when Roosevelt became president in 1933, did not have electricity. He put government money and resources into what was called rural electrification, the creation of different processes to bring rural electricity. One of these examples was Hoover Dam, right? Big damming projects. We condemn them now because of the environmental implications, but the dams are producing hydropower. The Hoover Dam, I think, provides power to 3 states, maybe even more than that at the time. Also creating rural electrical cooperatives, where the government funds local nonprofit utilities to provide electricity because it's not as profitable to do it in rural areas. Lyndon Johnson said Roosevelt turned the lights on. He turned the lights on for so many people. He created nightlife where there wasn't nightlife. And this was exactly what he intended to do. His belief was if you gave people power, if you gave them energy, they could be productive. Their lives could go forward and our society, our democracy could thrive.
And does modernization beyond the spread of electricity also mean general advancements in technology? So investment in universities, research, this sort of thing? Because I hadn't ever really thought about it, but the United States wasn't just endowed with great research universities. They had to come about at some point.
And the United States did not have great research universities before World War II. It was Roosevelt in World War II that created our great research universities, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, University of Texas, all of these big publics, Berkeley, UT, Wisconsin, all of this is federal money. And the model of it is the Manhattan Project. The Manhattan Project is the first big science project. And it's the model for everything we do. How does it work? The federal government provides money to bring together scientists who work on a big technological project that produces vaccines, that produces the internet, right? That produces all of these various things that then become consumer and commercial products. And we do this also in the social sciences, right? After World War II, the federal government invests in language learning. All of our universities have centers for Russian studies. That's all federal money that's doing that. Roosevelt starts that process.
So his 2 goals then were social. Well, his 2 goals were social and then modernizing. And you think that he accomplished both of these?
I think he did. And I also do want to just put out on the university level, I just want to add one more thing. It's the GI Bill, right? The Servicemen's Adjustment Act of 44 that Roosevelt passes that also makes it possible for middle-class people, probably like you and I, to go to university. Before that, universities were elite institutions, even the state institutions. Now, what the GI Bill does is it provides funding for people to go to school. I think Roosevelt accomplishes an enormous amount in these areas, social change and modernization, but there are some really grave costs. Really, really grave costs. And one of them is that the federal government now becomes more a part of everyone's life. And it means that the federal government is much more powerful and the states are much less powerful. And what does that mean? It means it is true that someone in Washington is often making decisions that affect your life in Oregon or in Wyoming. And that can be good when the person in Washington is making good decisions, but it can be bad when that person doesn't know what's going on in your life. And one of the problems of modern liberalism is of intelligent, well-intentioned people making decisions without understanding the people they're making decisions about. And that does begin to happen. And that's a real cost of this.